Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back again to another episode of As I Live and Grieve. I know I say it most every week. We've got another great guest. You're going to love this lady. This is my friend Nancy that I met on the grief cruise that I went on. Hey, Nancy. Thanks for joining me.
How are you? Oh,
I'm doing well.
Quite an exciting offer that you made me to be part of your podcast, especially after working with you on the grief cruise and getting to know you better, and really your mission of bringing healing to people who have lost a spouse. It's a big deal what you do.
Oh, thank you so much. So much. I appreciate it. To get us started, would you just introduce yourself, tell a little bit of your story to our listeners, and let them know who is Nancy?
That's a deep esoteric question. Who am I really?
But you can handle it.
The parts that would be relevant to the audience today. I'm Nancy Weil. I have been working in grief support for over 18 years now. At one point when I lived in Buffalo, I had the most comprehensive grief support program of any funeral home or cemetery in the country. I work for funeral homes, and I did work for cemeteries, so I have a background in death services, and it has been a passion of mine. I am a funeral celebrant, so I have officiated at funerals. I am certified in grief support and have run grief support groups both in person, and now I run one twice a month on Zoom that anybody who is looking is welcome. We'll give you my information later, is welcome to join in my grief support group that is on Zoom twice a month. I have really found it to be a calling, and I call it end-of-life ministry. I am also, on the other side of it, a certified laughter leader. So I say laughter and tears, that balance, but have research into how we use laughter and humor as coping mechanism when we are grieving. And so I kind of bring this broad spectrum approach to grief and help people to get the tools to cope as they're going through this grief journey. And it really is, for me, there's something very special in being with people through that, from the time of immediate loss where they're in a fog and things feel hopeless, and following them through our grief group journey together till they graduate. And they say, you know what, I don't think I need to come anymore. And for me, that is bittersweet because I'm really happy that we were able to walk with them when they needed us and that they don't anymore. And then there's a part of me with the abandonment issues going, where are you going? I really like them. Don't stay in touch. And so I do stay in touch with some of the people who have been part of my group. And sadly, there are times where they join back in again because now they've had another loss. And it's just, life becomes this journey. And I am there to accompany them on some of the dark parts of it. I have a little plaque here in my office that says, everyone wants to be the sun to brighten up someone's life, but why not be the moon to shine on someone's darkest hour?
Oh, I love that.
And I think that's
I love that. Yeah, very nice. In short, listeners, Nancy is one extremely busy lady. As well, I know for a fact that when she meets someone who is grieving, when she meets most people, but grievers especially, they become part of her extended family. I have seen her waving from afar to someone she recognizes because that person remains in her heart. So I feel very, very blessed to get Nancy with me today. We're going to talk about something related to grief that for me used to fill me with guilt. I remember specifically at my late husband Tom's funeral. It was just after calling hours. We had like a little celebration of life. His military buddies were there in their uniforms. They were guarding his urn. They were switching off every 15 minutes. They would salute when they approached. They would salute when they left. It was a very solemn celebration until after the main eulogy, the minister said, "Is there anyone else who would like to share a story about Tom?" One of his very good friends stood up, walked to the podium, and in his hand, he had a cup of Tim Hortons coffee, and he just set it on the podium. I giggled loud enough everyone could hear me. I was mortified. I was so embarrassed and humiliated. Tim Hortons coffee was something that was part of Tom's daily routine. And even the months that he was in the facility on hospice, I would take him a cup of Tim Hortons coffee every single day. He eventually got to the point where his swallowing was affected from the brain cancer, and the nurses said he could no longer have Tim Hortons. I still brought him that cup of coffee and would dab a few drops on his tongue or on his lips so he could still have his daily coffee. The fact that Tim, his good friend, brought this cup to the podium just brought back that memory of all the days that Tom and I went to Tim Hortons.
Right.
And made me laugh.
Yeah.
So, Nancy, how do we get to the point where we allow ourselves to accept that humor?
I will get to that, but Kathy,
okay,
the former Western New Yorker and not knowing how wide your audience is, let us backtrack. For those of us in the know, Tim Hortons, or as those of us in Western New York call it, Timmy Ho's, a coffee and donut chain that originated up in Canada and has made its way down. Yep. And my boys both had jobs in high school working there. It is very near and dear to the heart of anyone who lives near one. And so, and it does become quite a bit of an addiction for many people to always have their daily Tim Hortons coffee. It just becomes part of the routine. And as you said, going there and sitting and having a cup of coffee together, it is a part of a ritual. And we can get into rituals in a minute, and I'll talk about laughter first. But I love your story because many of us can picture that who know. Yeah. And so to anyone who's traveling and doesn't have a Tim Hortons, I would encourage you, if you happen to be traveling somewhere where there is one, you just stop and experience our traditions up there.
Absolutely.
So how do we laugh, right? I call it laughter in the face of tears. Mm-hmm. And how do we give ourselves permission to laugh?
Right.
I want to step back a second. It does. It usually immediately we will feel guilty. How can I laugh when my loved one has died?
Absolutely.
Right. When we step back into what it does to us physiologically, that will be the beginning of giving yourself permission. So I'm not going to go into all of the things that happen when we laugh. However, when we laugh, when we are grieving, it boosts the immune system, which we know gets depleted when we are grieving. It helps with stress. It reduces stress and the stress hormones, which we know are running very, very high. It helps with memory retention, which again, we know we live by Post-it notes because we can't remember anything. Our brain just slows down. It's in a fog. Mm-hmm. So when we laugh, we are reducing stress and boosting our immune system, and it levels the emotions a little bit and helps with the brain function. All of these things start to happen because we go, I then encourage people to think about if your doctor wrote you a prescription and says no copay, available anytime, and I'm going to boost your immune system and reduce your stress, and all of these things are going to happen. You're like, sign me up.
Absolutely.
That helps to give you permission, right? On a pure physiological taking care of yourself. It helps right there. Okay.
Right.
From that, it also emotionally reminds us that there is still joy in the memories.
Yes.
They become bittersweet, but there's sweetness in them. And so as we share those stories, it's not so morose. They lived their life. They had a fullness of life. Remembering those stories and laughing together with others who remember brings us into that moment of really celebrating their life.
Right.
And in the research I did, one of the questions we asked was, my loved one would want me to laugh and be happy again. 100% of the people responded yes. So the disconnect is we know they don't want us to be sad and grieve forever, right? Just like we would not want suffering on those we leave behind. We just can't get there because we miss them. And so as we begin to incorporate that we give ourselves permission to laugh, right? Helps us to heal. And the interesting thing that we just do not talk about, but I had realized early on, is that one of the greatest gifts of laughter is it brings us into the present moment of now. When we're laughing, we're not thinking, we're just here now, present.
Right.
And I say grief is a process of looking back in regret and looking forward in fear. When someone is grieving, rarely do they look at their future and see unicorns and rainbows.
No.
And so we have a lot of anxiety when we're grieving. How are we going to make it through this? How are we going to do that? How are we going to handle financials? Whatever that is. Or we look backwards with, oh, I shouldn't have yelled at him 10 years ago when we were making dinner, right? We do this. Everybody does this. We do this. But when we laugh, we're here now and we get relief for a moment.
Especially if it's spontaneous. And that laughter for me was spontaneous. And what sealed it for me and made me start to feel differently at that moment was that afterward, when people are coming up, of course, they're hugging me and everything. And so many people just don't know what to say. But a good friend of mine hugged me and said, I'm so glad you laughed because I felt like it gave everyone in the room permission to do the same.
Yeah. We need space for both. We need laughter and we need tears. Neither one of us is saying, oh, just be in joy all the time. That's a pretty big stretch to ask someone.
Right.
But it's okay to have both.
Yeah. And most of our lives, Tom and I, we were married for just under 12 years. We married later in life, but we had been friends for 20 years before that. His middle son dated my younger daughter for a little. That's how we met. At any rate, our life was filled with more laughter than tears by a long shot. So we spent most of our time together laughing. I also felt it was kind of natural for me to kind of laugh at the stories that were being told, at the memories that were being shared, because a lot of them were quite humorous. They really were.
Yeah.
What can you say to someone? Is it better to think of a memory that makes you smile, that you think would make them smile if you want to recall something? Because grievers love to hear those stories. It lets us know that the loved one that was so huge a part of our life was also important to others and made an impact on others. So if we're trying to recall a memory, is it better to find a lighthearted one?
I think it's just important to find the one that resonates with you the most when you go to share something.
Okay.
I had this discussion yesterday with my daughter because a mentor of hers who helped her, she's a mental health therapist, and had helped her with her licensing and oversight. And she just found out that he had died. And she was telling me, what he had done and how instrumental and helpful he was when she was in those early years after graduating college. And I said, you need to write that down and tell the family that story. And she said, I think I'm going to go to the wake, Mom, and I'm going to tell them that. And I said, it's going to mean so much because what happens is we don't know all the people that our loved one interacts with. We don't know who they are. And so all of a sudden when these stories come, whether it's a letter and a note that they send us or they come to the wake and, share the story, we don't know those things. And for us to see the ripple effect of what they have done and how they have positively impacted others, we just draw on that sometimes.
Yeah.
To know what a difference they made, because we know what a difference they made to us, but to see the small little moments, and most of these are moments that if you knew your loved one, you think they wouldn't think twice about that. Like that's insignificant, but to the person, it meant so much.
Yeah.
And that they associate your loved one with that story. And so whether it's a funny story or it's a emotionally connecting story, we just want the stories.
Yeah.
And if we can, let's talk about stories a second. Can we do that, Kat?
Sure. Absolutely.
That was my theme on Tuesday night at my grief group. So I'm a little into storytelling right now.
That's super.
We discussed it. And so we looked at it a couple of ways. A, remembering our loved ones' stories and recording them and writing them down for future generations, right? And our own story. When we talk about the dash between the dates of birth and death, it's the things that get missed out is what was their favorite flavor of ice cream, right? What class did they like the most in school? We know some of the big things, but so often we don't know the little things and how treasured those things are. And so we talked about that, recording, whether it's on a video, whether it's on a recorder of audio, whether it's writing it down. My dad, after mom died, his coping was writing down all these family stories. He has a little bound, bound book.
Yeah.
He's written 5 of them so far.
Oh my goodness.
Tell him, but they're more like, here were some funny things that were sent to me in my email. And that's but he's giving us addresses of where people lived that we could go, and stories we would never have known about his grandparents or my mother's grandparents, or going back generationally. And so for us to have those stories and to be able to pass those on to future generations, where otherwise they'll be forgotten. He added photos, we found old family photos. There's no better inheritance than that.
Absolutely. What a legacy.
Yeah. And so here's where I'm going to go a little deeper on this.
Okay.
And I love, because this is something I have said for many years, and now they're finding through epigenetics, through research, it's actually true. I think I said something that's actually being proven. But what I tell people who are grieving and feeling very hopeless and desperate, and I can't do this, I can't do another day of this.
Right.
I tell them to do one of 2 things. I tell them to either look back in their own life at a time that was very difficult and they didn't think they'd make it through, and they did, and remind themselves that, you made it through and you can do this. I said, and if you don't have that, actually, I told them 3 things. That's 1, look at your own life. The second thing I told them is go back in your family history and think of the stories of the difficult times that one of your ancestors went through. Many of us, have someone maybe who came over and started a new life, who immigrated. Many of us have maybe someone who was a soldier and went through war.
Right.
Many of us have a story ancestrally that we can say they made it through, and the DNA that runs in them runs in me, and I can pull from their strength and make it through. My great grandmother had 5 little girls. The youngest was a newborn at the time that my great grandfather died of pneumonia, years old. So she was about 30, and she never remarried. She built a career in the early 1900s, taking over his job as a rice broker on the docks of Charleston, South Carolina, at a time when women didn't do that.
Right.
And we were always so impressed with the strength she had in raising those girls. And as an adult, I remember saying to my grandma, it's so interesting that, your parents only had girls. And she said, oh, no, I had 2 brothers. One died in infancy and one as a toddler from the diseases of the time.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I realized that my great-grandmother, by the time she was 30, had buried 2 children and a husband. And somehow still found the strength within her to persevere.
Yeah.
And when I went through my hard times, I thought, all right, I can draw on her strength.
Sure. Yeah.
My hard times, thankfully, have paled having to go through that.
Yeah.
And then the third thing I say is, if you don't have your own story, and if you don't have an ancestral story, find stories of people who inspire you, right? Whether it's a documentary or a movie about someone's life, or a little video clip of somebody speaking who's an inspirational speaker who overcame the odds. Borrow their story of inspiration.
Right.
And sometimes you're going to, in grief support group, we're going to borrow from each other.
Right.
And finding that inspiration that says, I can be more resilient and strong than I think.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And on the same topic of storytelling, another guest I had very recently, in fact, suggested that we not just tell our stories, we relive our stories to immerse ourselves in the memories as we're telling the stories. It's important to our future generations. Like every so often, I live in the same house as my daughter, her husband, and their 2 sons, my grandsons, that I love dearly. They're the blessings of my life. And every so often, they're at the age now where they love cars. So I will tell them a story about a car I drove. And one day, Nate said to me, Grandma, how did you get to drive all those cool cars? I said, I lived in the 60s. You see movies about the 60s, but that's when I lived. Cars were important. So little things like that, and just those little stories. And they've told me that they love those little stories that pop up here and there, those little memories, because it helps them learn more who I was as a younger person. So we need to share those stories because I guarantee if you do, after you're gone, those stories will pop up again. They really were.
Absolutely.
Really. Yeah.
And, I had mentioned earlier, I said, we'll get back to it. So I want to honor what I said about rituals.
I was just going to ask about that.
Let's talk about it. You are right on it too. Rituals can take a lot of different forms, and we could do a whole segment on it. But so often those rituals, we will create some after someone has died, whether it's on the anniversary of their birth, on the anniversary of their death, on our wedding anniversaries, whatever significant dates or holidays. Mm-hmm. We will oftentimes create a ritual, and that might be visiting their grave or decorating it in the spring. I know somebody whose husband was a major Yankees fan, and the family all puts together things and goes out and decorates the grave for the spring to have up all summer, right? With all the different Yankees memorabilia. Mm-hmm. And that's a ritual now because they do it every year.
Right.
So sometimes the ritual is on their birthday, making their favorite kind of cake and inviting people over and telling the stories and celebrating their life and enjoying one of their favorite recipes.
Yeah.
And so we can create rituals. My family has an interesting ritual. My brother started it. I don't know why he started it. And he only started it around one grandparent, not the other three. I love my mother, but it's called Buki Day. We call my grandfather Buki. And on his birthday, November 26th, all of the grandchildren, we pull his photo out of the china cabinet or where we display it, and it sits on the table, and we have dinner with Buki. Mm-hmm. We all share photos to each other and text messages, Buki Day. And we do this. Yeah. Why? I don't know, but it's a ritual now. We won't have a November 26th on his birthday and not pull out and have dinner with him. Mm-hmm. So again, we can create these rituals, spread them, share them within the family. But the point of them is to remember to have a coping mechanism, to celebrate, because that day is going to come, whatever your significant dates are, whether you have something planned around it or not.
That's right.
Right? It's there. We're not going to forget. I always say the heart has no calendar. It just knows it misses someone. So there's no timeline. Mm-hmm. And so when those dates come, how much nicer if we can ritualize and bring others into them?
Absolutely. My ritual is very simple. Guess what it is? I go to Tim Hortons. That's money. Again, just the memory of Tom. So I go to Tim Hortons and I just raise my coffee and I know he's right there with me. Yeah. Rituals can be very simple. They can be very complex. In my parents' generation, the ritual was that you always went to the cemetery. You went to the gravesite. Well, that doesn't always work now. Cremations and so many things, people maybe are sharing ashes or spreading them places. And so you might not have a gravesite to go to. So you can create a ritual doing anything you want. You can make it a day of memories. You can just make it a day of raising a glass, or a day where you sit quietly, perhaps in the park. Maybe take your dog for a walk, sit quietly and just remember. And you probably are doing a ritual and may not even realize that that's what you're doing. But on those anniversaries of the dates of their death, for some reason, we remember those dates very specifically, and your thoughts always go to them.
And you're reliving it as you talk about reliving stories. Sometimes the stories are dramatic.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So to be able to shift it a little bit. When my friend's brother died, I arranged to have a yellow rose bush delivered to her house and planted it in her yard. Mm-hmm. Every year, she puts me on to a FaceTime and says, look, it's blooming. It's blooming. Look how much it's blooming. Every year.
Yeah.
Ritual, right?
And that means so much to her that's just a relatively simple gift that you can give. But it's so important to grievers when someone else comes to you or says to you or shares a photo with you or something that says, this made me think of, for me, I love it when that happens.
Yeah.
I miss Tom too, or something like that. Those things are so meaningful to me. I start to get choked up every time I think about them. Of course, they're meaningful. Mm-hmm. I have one more question about humor, and then we'll wrap things up. Since you are a funeral officiant and you have helped people plan their funerals, their celebrations, and things like that, has anyone ever asked you to plan one specifically that's more lighthearted or that will make people laugh or smile?
Sure.
Have they?
Absolutely. People set the tone that they want,
Okay.
right? And my job is to capture the essence of their loved one and how they want to memorialize them at that moment. And so if that person was a very funny person and lighthearted, they'll say, we don't want to be morose. That's not who they are. That doesn't honor them.
Yeah.
Because that's not who, everybody's like, who are you talking about? They were never serious, right? And it also depends sometimes on the circumstance of how someone died.
Well, that's true.
And so if it was something where, I'll give you a great story. I love stories. My grandmother died at 109 years old.
Well,
Right? There was nothing. So we're having this graveside service, and each of us was sharing a little memory about my grandmother. And my oldest brother's turned to speak, and he turns to everybody and he says,
What?
2 cannibals were having dinner. And I'll go, what? And he goes, and the one said to the other one, I never did like your mother-in-law. And he goes, well, then just eat the potatoes. And he looks at us and he goes,
Oh,
that was my grandmother's favorite joke. Now, I was a grandchild. She never told me that joke.
Yep.
But my oldest brother remembered her sharing that joke with him and laughing because that was her favorite joke. And so we laughed telling stories about her. And my dad afterwards said that the cemetery workers were like over standing off waiting for us to die. And he said they kept turning around because they were laughing and they didn't want to be seen as being inappropriate at a funeral. He said, well, we were funny.
That's hilarious. I love that.
That honored who my grandmother was.
Wow.
Yeah. And so
it's okay.
It's okay.
Well, I know that now.
It's okay.
But okay. So sadly, the time has come where we need to start to wrap things up. This is the point in my podcast needs to be where I turn the microphone over to my guests so that you can speak directly to our listeners. And we do, by the way, have an international audience. We have listeners in over 100 countries around the world. And so they don't know Tim Hortons. You know, they may have heard the story before. So, or at least the cup of coffee might cinch it for them. So this is your chance to speak directly to the listeners. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I just want them all to know my motto is you don't have to grieve alone. And so if anybody is listening or has someone they want to suggest that would like to join in my Healing Hearts Grief Support Group that is on Zoom first and third Tuesday every month, they are welcome to join us. We're at 7:00 Eastern time. So think about your time zone. Sorry if you'll be the middle of the night, but we will be together. If anybody is interested, they can email me at nancy@nancyweil.com, which is NANCYWEIL.com. My website is thelaughacademy.com. And on there, you will see a tab for the Grief Academy, and the support group information is on there as well. But truly, to join together in community as we do, there is something magical that we know that one another is holding the other one in our hearts. And so for anybody who listens to this, you know you are not alone in your journey. You know there are others who care and who understand. And somehow when they say the phrase, misery loves company, I think there's truth to that because we do hold one another and make what seems unbearable bearable. And I thank you for your ministry of helping others at these difficult
Beautiful
times.
and eloquent words. It reminded me of a quote, I think it's from Shakespeare, and I may not quote it precisely, but it is something like, and if I laugh at any mortal thing, 'tis only that I may not weep. And I think that really fits as well. So listeners, if you didn't have a pen or pencil handy when Nancy was citing her website, that information will be in the podcast notes. So just click the notes and you'll see it. And it should be a direct link where you can just click on it and it will take you right to the website, or your email box will pop up so you can send her a message. I know she'd love to hear from you. And wouldn't you want to be a part of her extended family? I would be so honored. Okay. So I also want to remind everybody to take care of yourselves wherever you are in our world. Self-care is vital as you're grieving. Grief is a long journey. We've all talked about that so many times as well. So whatever you do, take care of yourself. Check Nancy's website out. Send her a message. Pop into her grief group. I know you'll enjoy that experience as well. And it's free. We love free things, don't we? All righty. Time to go. I hope you have fun this week, and I hope you will find the time again to listen in the next time. as we all continue to live and grieve. Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveandgrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.